Hi, this is Marco Pimentel. Welcome to the podcast, Someone Like You. In this first season, you'll discover founders, creators, entrepreneurs, and business owners who are passionate about creating business models with lasting, sustainable climate solutions.
I was really tired of seeing environment reporting and environmental issues in general being really pushed to the margins and radicalized and made out to be these fringe things when we know that the vast majority of Canadians are very passionate about the natural world. It's something that all Canadians are very proud of.
Storytellers. They hold a tremendous amount of power in our society, and that power represents both a privilege and a responsibility. And hopefully, journalism and media and news outlets use that power for public good. I've co-founded and sold a digital publishing business. It was focused on advertising and technology, so I understand how it works. It's often quite a balance between people, content, advertising, and monetization. When we had the Great Recession in the early 2000s, this really impacted journalism and these media outlets. Advertising dollars dried up, and people who were telling these stories had to be laid off. For perspective, in 2018, ABC, CBS, NBC, some of the more popular North American news outlets only covered 142 minutes of climate change content in the entire year. It's better in today's times, in 2022, in terms of this coverage, but that storytelling really informs people around what's happening with our climate. What can we do, our buying decisions, and who do we vote for in politics? And that brings me to this week's episode. I get to sit down with Emma Gilchrist, co-founder and editor-in-chief of the Narwhal, a pioneer in nonprofit environmental journalism. Based in Victoria, BC, with bureaus across Canada and a team of journalists reporting on pressing environmental issues across Canada. The Narwhal was created in 2018 when Emma and co-founder Carol Linnett grew out of their previous nonprofit project. It felt to Emma that fair and balanced environmental and climate reporting was missing in mainstream media. Emma grew up in a small town in northwestern Alberta where she saw firsthand the important role resource developments played in Canadian communities. In 2002, she enrolled in the journalism program at Mount Royal University, and upon graduation worked as a reporter and editor in the UK and in Canada, and later in the nonprofit sector. The Narwhal is currently ad-free, and it's supported by over 4,200 subscribers. I hope you enjoy our inspiring conversation. Oh, hi, Emma. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Well, thanks for joining us today. We've had a lot of fun conversations in the past. You're based in Victoria, BC. And I wanted to just jump right in. You've worked in a lot of newsrooms and also in the nonprofit sectors. You've created the Green Guide at the Calgary Herald. Environment seems to be kind of in your wheelhouse for many, many years. So what drew you to environmental journalism?
Yeah, I kind of stumbled upon it, to be honest. I started my career working in the UK. And so kind of in the mid 2000s, I was working in England and seeing the rise of environmental consciousness and environmental journalism happening there. And then when I came back to Calgary in around 2006, there was just this complete void. And at the same time, it was right around the time that Al Gore's documentary An Inconvenient Truth came out. And there was this huge surge in interest in climate change and the environment. And I just found people were really wondering what they could do about it. And so I started writing this guide at the Calgary Herald about all the things on kind of a personal level that you could do, whether that's how to actually find fuel efficiency ratings and buy a fuel efficient car, how to retrofit your home, how to recycle, which was really tough in Calgary at the time. And so I kind of started there. And then it just really grew from there. I was sort of looking for the answer of how can an individual have an impact over the trajectory of climate and the environmental crisis. And my search for the answer to that question ultimately kind of led me away from the Calgary Herald and the focus on the personal choices that you can make. And I ended up kind of venturing into the world of how is policy made? How are these decisions made? Who is influencing this? And that path led me to the Narwhal.
And were you finding it personal that, like, on a personal level, there were things that you were interested in with climate or noticing yourself or kind of digging into it during that time?
Yeah, I mean, I when I was writing the green guide, I tried to take all of my own advice. So like everything I wrote about, I did. It was like this really practical thing, and we did a lot of Q&As with the audience. And so I was very intellectually curious about the whole thing and kind of getting deeper and deeper. And as I got into it, I was realizing more and more about how much of our personal choice is really shaped by the policy choices around us. So in somewhere like Calgary, for instance, it's really, really hard to live without a car or to walk or to cycle. And so I was seeing how that kind of framework of like personal choice was sort of overshadowing the fact that there were like large policy decisions being made about funding roads versus transit and things like that. And then at the same time, this was around the time as well of like the oil sands really starting to boom in Canada. And that, was really interesting as well. And there were some instances of, air pollution events that were impacting people, as far south as Edmonton, for instance. And at that time as well, scientists in the federal government started to be muzzled. They weren't allowed to speak to journalists anymore about air pollution. And so I was just like getting pulled further and further into this unraveling story, I think, and realizing how big the forces were that were kind of preventing us from honestly tackling this challenge that was in front of us. And I also grew up in a small town in northern Alberta. So I think that's something I've always carried with me. Like most of the people who I grew up with work in oil and gas. And I think the conversations that I've seen playing out in traditional media were not really representative of the true conversation. There's a lot of polarization, and you kind of have like an activist hanging off a bridge saying one thing, and oil company saying the polar opposite thing, and not a lot in the middle to help people make sense of that. And so that's what I ultimately got really interested in, is like, how do we actually help people like make sense of these complex issues? And they're not black and white. They are really hard things that we need to do. And that just got really juicy for me, and I kept going with it.
Yeah, and I think if we think about journalism and the media and that type of space, maybe now you start to see climate and environmentalism starting to be covered in the news. But years ago, there was probably very, very little. I think there was a report that I read in 2019 that, like, some of the major, even just from a US perspective, ABC, NBC, some of the major networks, I think it was like 140 minutes in the entire year was covered towards environmentalism and climate change.
Yeah, I really saw it drop out. Like back in 2007, when I was working at the Herald, actually, most newspapers in Canada around then had an environment reporter. But the media industry went through such a difficult time over that next 10 years with kind of the fallout of digital advertising, and newsrooms were just eviscerated. So tons and tons and rounds of layoffs. And that resulted in almost the total elimination of environment beat reporters. And that's sort of where the genesis for the Narwhal came from, is this idea that I always say the Narwhal is like the environment section of the newspaper, except there is no environment section of the newspaper. And there's so much, that I think we get so used to seeing, as like we're really used to the fact that there's like a business section of the newspaper and there's a lifestyle section of the newspaper, but there's no environment section. And nobody really thinks about that. And so we are just, it's like there should be an environment section. And what do you know, there's the internet now, so we can do that online pretty efficiently. So that's really where the thinking for the Narwhal came from.
Yeah, so you co-founded the Narwhal. It was 2018 with Carol Innit.
Yeah.
And so you're in environmental journalism. You have obviously a passion. You want to get the message out. How do you start it? How do you kick it off? How do you build out that framework? And you mentioned the Narwhal being kind of like the environmental section of a newspaper. So how do you go from an idea to starting it?
Yeah, I mean, we started really small. It was just me and Carol as full-time staff at the time that we started. And we'd already kind of had proof of concept with our previous project that we had been working on. And so what we really did is we took like everything that Carol and I had learned working on our previous project for 5 years, and then we just created the dream. So we really wanted to create a brand that was really mainstream. That was something that was really important to us. Is I was really tired of seeing environment reporting and environmental issues in general being really like pushed to the margins and radicalized and made out to be these fringe things, when we know that the vast majority of Canadians are very passionate about the natural world. It's something that all Canadians are very proud of. You know, you look at any Canadian tourism advertisement and it's people canoeing and hiking and playing ice hockey, and you know, the natural world is like absolutely core to our identity as a country. And so we wanted to come up with a brand that kind of celebrated that. And that's part of why we chose the narwhal as this sort of awe-inspiring animal that lives in, you know, the Canadian Arctic and is also really reliant on sea ice, you know, which is in less and less supply these days. So we started there. We really, like I say, like we started small. We just tried to do good work that and provide journalism that nobody else was providing. So we wouldn't chase the same kinds of stories. I think there's a lot of kind of groupthink in journalism. People all go to like the same press conferences and they try to like beat each other to the story of the day. And so we kind of just took all of the traditional rules of journalism and like threw them out the window. So we decided that we weren't running advertising. We were going to start as a nonprofit. So we weren't going to have shareholders. We weren't going to chase daily news. And we were going to instead focus on doing in-depth and investigative journalism, which is the thing that suffered the most with the crisis in the traditional journalism funding model.
So you took, thinking about journalism and thinking about the media, the way that most of them are funded is through advertising. So you took that off the table. Most of the advertising is driven by news, content that's coming up. You got to create a lot of content because there's a lot of eyeballs, but that's how you do it. So you removed advertising and you wanted to focus on the hardest, most expensive pieces of content to share with people, being investigative journalism. How did that, obviously in combination of being a nonprofit, but how did you get started? Was it grants that the Canadian government had? Was it funding from individuals? How do you do it when you take out the advertising piece?
Yeah, so we had some private philanthropic grants, and we had built up that support through our previous project as well. So we had a little bit of that support to carry us forward. And then we put a huge focus, though, on reader donations, basically, right from the get-go. That's where we put our energies. So we literally started the Narwhal with to build our website and brand and get it launched, we had like $25,000. So we didn't have a lot of money. And we really pushed, the membership model. So we were looking at models from around the world that were succeeding, like The Guardian, for instance, out of the UK, and just really took the gamble that if we produced really high quality journalism that you couldn't get anywhere else, that a certain percentage of people would pay for it. And that's the thing that's really driven our growth over the last 4 years. So we've gone from, 200 members in that first 6 months kind of thing to now nearly 5,000 members. And they're contributing somewhere in the range of like 40 to 45% of our budget. And then simultaneously, we've also been able to attract more support from philanthropic grants. But no, in the beginning, there was no government grants or any support of that kind.
And from a membership side, and you've seen this in media grow, the idea of subscriptions. Remove the ads. Subscriptions are driving some of the revenue, and I think pretty much most media companies want to go towards a subscription model because they know that it's similar to the old days of a magazine subscription. But when your members are doing this, do you know, like, why are they paying for the Narwhal? Is it, do you hear things that it's support, it's the content that they love to see? How, like, what are members saying?
Yeah, we just like absolutely love hearing these comments from our members. It's a real mix of stuff, but generally speaking, like they just love the content. They feel like they can't find anywhere else. A lot of them feel really passionately about environmental issues. One of the interesting things with our model is that we don't have a paywall either. So that's another part of the traditional model that we kind of just throw out the window. So people are voluntarily paying. So you kind of have two schools of thought on that. Like, so for us, we're really tapping into somebody's sort of philanthropic giving sense, right? So they're giving because of the meaning that it makes for them. They're giving because it makes them feel good. They're giving because of what it accomplishes in the world. As soon as you go into subscription, it becomes kind of transactional, right? And then you're giving to get something. And interestingly, because of our model, we have a like pay what you can model. We say, you can be a member of the Narwhal for any amount per month. And on average, people give about $13 a month, which is more than they would give if we had a paywall. Like most paywalled sites charge less than that, right? So that's kind of one of the interesting, I think, like behavioral economics things that goes on here, which is by allowing people to choose and letting them choose their own amount, they actually end up giving more. And I think the feeling of giving when it's voluntary like that, it is very different from when you hit a paywall and you're like, oh God, like I have to put in my credit card information now to read this piece of content.
Yeah, and on the Narwhal, like you said, it's not a paywall. It's a pretty soft ask, and it's neat to see that the amount that people voluntarily, subscribe to or support per month would be, like you said, higher than what a normal subscription would be. So, I have a couple of questions around this because there's a couple of rules at the Narwhal. One is, I think, follow the facts and tell it like it is, and then from like a branding and website perspective, the branding is beautiful. The photos are incredibly visual. The content and the way that is written is written in a way that really kind of educates the reader, but allows them to form their own opinion. And so, how do you achieve that, and how do you maintain that? Because I'm assuming that a big part of the success, like 200 members to 5,000 members, is an absolute massive amount of growth over a period of time. There's obviously a bunch of needs. So how do you maintain that, achieve that? Is it the team growing like crazy? Just understanding that kind of that big question around that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough, I think, to keep doing that, but there are just so many important stories that need to be told, and I think we've been able to hire a really incredible team. We've done a lot of work over the last year to like define our kind of core values as an organization and build those into the editorial process in terms of what kind of stories we choose and what kind of stories we don't. And so, things like that, we really embrace complexity. We aren't looking for simple, this person's right, this person's wrong kind of stories. We're looking for those complex stories that kind of open people's minds and truly help them understand an issue more. We have a very clear investment in the photography side of things. So that's something that we make a priority. We invest in like the visuals, that increasingly in like the data visualization, the maps. We have this great opportunity because we don't have ads. We get to have a beautiful website, right? Because there's no ads cluttering it up. We get to have full width images. And I think it's just, we lean more and more into like the thing that we're able to do that lots of other publications can't. Why would people be coming to the Narwhal? What can we offer that you aren't going to find anywhere else? And that really rich visual experience is part of it. The visuals are really important to us because we report on a lot of places that are out of sight, out of mind. And these are places that people may never get to visit, and I think it's important to help folks be able to visualize like what, say, the Peace River Valley looks like. that's going to be, flooded to build the Site C Dam, or, repeat that in any number of places, what the peatlands of Northern Ontario look like, or what the people who live on those lands look like. And it's like we have this opportunity to sort of transport people and allow them to have an experience through our journalism that they might not otherwise be able to have. And I think, we're consistently sort of rewarded by our readers and our members by investing in those things. And so it encourages us to keep doing so.
Every week on Someone Like You, we dive into stimulating conversations with founders, entrepreneurs, business owners, and the likes who are consciously and successfully creating sustainable business solutions for the long haul. Tune in every week for a new inspiring conversation on leading climate solutions, and if you're enjoying the podcast, please share it. And also, subscribe to the platform of your choice and give us a rating and a review. It'd be much appreciated. Yeah, and I think, well, that's what we're talking about today, but storytelling is incredibly impactful. And I think when we think about the broader issue of just climate and the impact that it's having, people are starting to feel it. It's hot, floods, you name it. And so being able to represent that in storytelling and allowing people to experience what's happening or could happen is really important. So I wanted to get into the impact side. So, two entrepreneurs, journalists create the Narwhal. There's, mass media layoffs. Environmental journalism is not being covered in the mainstream media. What are the environmental stories that the Narwhal is currently covering, and what type of impact are you trying to have to educate people around the issues that we're having?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's such a wide variety of stories that we're covering. We have a Prairies Bureau now, a BC Bureau, and an Ontario Bureau. So geographically, our reach keeps growing. One of the things that we are always trying to achieve is to bridge divides between people. So that could be giving people information that they might not otherwise have. It could be helping people see different perspectives. I think some of the reporting out of our Prairies Bureau recently has been really speaking to this. So our Alberta reporter, Drew Anderson, he recently wrote an amazing feature about a small community in southern Alberta that's everybody in that community is being forced to move because of flooding due to climate change. And, he goes out there on the ground with these people who, they thought they had their forever home and have lived there for decades. And now they're, having to sell up and literally move their whole livelihoods. Some of these families have been there for multiple generations. And I think what it does is it helps to make this kind of theoretical concept of climate change more real for people, and also with voices of people on the ground who aren't like environmental activists, right? These are just like good, average Albertans who are having to really face the reckoning. So there's stories like that. I think some of our favorite stories are those ones that are just, kind of have unusual characters in them, and they bring to light issues that you might not otherwise hear about. Drew also wrote a story about, a couple in Saskatchewan whose land has been contaminated by Imperial Oil, and they're like decades long fight to not, have this happen. And it's just like, why isn't that story being told anywhere else? It's, it's almost like an Aaron Brockovich type story, right? And it's not being told anywhere else. And then, we cover all of the big natural resource issues. So in BC, stuff around the Coastal GasLink pipeline, we're still following that very closely. Forestry, mining. We just hired our first dedicated mining reporter. We've also just added a dedicated biodiversity reporter in British Columbia. So we're really, coming at it from all different angles. We really love to cover Indigenous protected areas. So like Indigenous-led conservation. I think that's a really important thing that's happening in Canada, and kind of shines light on something that we also find very important, which is solutions, is to, also shine a light on things that are working and ways that we can kind of get out of these intractable conflicts. Because if you just report on the conflict time and time and time again, I think that's one of the coolest things about journalism, actually, is that done really well, when you're reporting on a conflict, you actually can start to thread together what some of the solutions could be, and you can help shine a light on a path forward.
Yeah, I had a good friend of mine reach out to me a couple of weeks ago and said, I was Googling an issue, and he's been in oil and gas his entire life, from Alberta, and he found a Narwhal article just from a Google search, and was just he said the balance and the way that was reported was really influential to the way he was thinking. And because it was uh, like you said, it was more about the facts and tell it as it is, but it was just the way that it was written. And it was interesting because he knew that we had chatted before, and brought it out. And I thought that was really impactful. So how, as a Narwhal's grown, your team is now, is it 25 people, maybe
Yeah,
more
it's
now?
about to be 23.
23 people. So the Narwhal's grown. And obviously climate, and the conversation around climate has obviously grown as well. Have you seen the main media grow with that as well? Like, how is the landscape now today in
Yeah,
2022?
I think it has changed hugely. And this is probably one of the things that it gives me the most hope, is like when we launched the Narwhal 4 years ago, we were like really seen as sort of like the riffraff in the Canadian media landscape. We were really like on the outside of it and fighting for credibility. And now, like, we're very much, right in the middle of things. And we have partnership with the Globe and Mail, and we have a new partnership with the Winnipeg Free Press. Our new Manitoba reporter is actually shared between us and the Winnipeg Free Press, and all of the content will run in both publications. And that paper is kind of the paper of record for Manitoba. And so I think what the Narwhal has in part been able to contribute to is like some of that mainstreaming of environment coverage. And it's just absolutely indisputable at this point that environment and climate change is, pretty much the issue of our time. And we're seeing more and more publications come around to, wanting to do better coverage of it. And I think to the extent that, we can help lead the way on that and help show that there is an appetite for it, I think people are noticing, right? And that's part of how change happens.
And do you think that the main media are investing the dollars back into journalism, or um, uh, do you think that it is part of the combination of news that's happening, the climate related news that are happening, that is mostly covered? Like, do you find that they are spending the time and the resources to build up the journalism side of it?
I mean, sometimes, probably not to the extent that needs to happen. I think a lot of traditional publications are still like really struggling with the bottom line, right? They haven't really cracked the nut of how to make the financials work. So they're just really squeezed, right? So they don't, I mean, we're by far like the largest environment bureau in Canada, right? I mean, even like the largest papers in the country, they have maybe just like a couple environment reporters. So it's not happening to the extent it needs to. And part of the challenges too is like when you invest in like investigative journalism, as you mentioned earlier, it's like the most expensive journalism. It's harder to make money off of it. And that's where, when you have a model that's based off advertising, that's based off getting just like a ton of eyeballs every day and having to crank it out. And it's not as focused on the impact, right? It's the whole thing with the Narwhal's model, because we are a nonprofit, we're able to kind of totally shift the things that are important to us. And what's important to us is the impact. And part of what allows us to do that is our ability to raise money, through donations and through grants. And that kind of funding can help support investigative journalism that otherwise might not be that economical in a traditional newsroom.
Yeah. So when we think about where the narwhal is, the media, and how it's covering, how do you see in the future the narwhal contributing to just a larger issue of the environment and climate change? Is it continuing to scale and grow across Canada? More stories, more information, more storytelling, education when it comes to politics and at that side. How do you see the narwhal contributing to that?
Yeah, I think for us, like the goal over the next 5 years is to scale so that we are truly able to cover all regions of Canada. And ideally to be able to provide more coverage in each of those regions as well. And so I think it's kind of taking what we found worked originally. We started really focus on the West and the North, and then being able to build that out and also build into like different types of products. So we've kind of toyed with different products over the years. Like we've done mini documentaries, we've done a podcast, we do an annual print edition. But currently, with how much growth there's been, we've been very focused on just like the online content. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to get back to doing some of like the video work, the documentary. A podcast would be a really natural thing for us to expand into. And that allows us to reach people in different places too. I think one of the things that we're excited to do is to, we're really good at doing like the in-depth and, investigative work, but how do we make that more accessible to more people? And so, our presence on social media and on Instagram and on TikTok and all of those places is, I think, allowing us to reach people where they're at. And that ultimately is really important to us, is to make sure that we are getting beyond the choir, right? And reaching people where they're at. And so some of those new products, I'm hoping to find some time to get those going in the next couple of years.
Yeah, because it's you when you invest heavily in content, you need to also invest heavily in the distribution of that content, be it social, sharing. But I'm assuming that a lot of the growth thus far has been, people sharing the content, finding the content, social media. What do you think has been kind of the secret aspect of the growth of just the sharing of the content and people, reading it and sharing it and consuming it?
Yeah, I mean, definitely like from the get-go, social was really, really huge for us. And in the very beginning, Facebook in particular was like the biggest driver of our traffic. Over the last couple of years, Facebook has tweaked its algorithm multiple times and news isn't featured as much on Facebook. So that's become less and less. So it's shifted. And, now we're getting more traffic from Google and from search and from referrals from other sites and things like that. But it is very much like, this is kind of the cool thing about the Narwhal, like whether you're just a reader or you're a member or whatever, like every person who reads the Narwhal and shares the Narwhal is definitely part of our success. And I think it's just kind of that like ripple effect of people telling other people about it. And, there's a little bit of a feeling, I think, like, that once you know about it, you're kind of like in this club, right? And we really rely on people spreading the word, though.
Yeah. And so when it comes to the climate side of things and the environment, you've been reporting on it, writing on it for many, many years. What are you optimistic about?
Good question. I mean, I'm really optimistic about the landscape for new media in Canada right now to step in and offer new types of coverage like we are. There was a new kind of federal tax change in the last couple of years that allows nonprofit news organizations like ours to issue tax receipts. So that's really exciting and opens up, the frontier of nonprofit news. In the US, there's over 300 nonprofit news organizations. And in Canada, you could count them on one hand. And I think that we've proven that, nonprofit news can be quite a powerful force for good in the world. So that's something that I feel optimistic about. On honestly, like our members are constantly making me feel optimistic with just like the fact that they continue to sign up and the messages that they send. And it's nothing short of like a little bit of a miracle, that 5,000 people have decided to voluntarily pay each month to help support the Narwhal. So I think I find a lot of hope in those things. And just getting different people talking to one another. I think we all have more in common than we might, be led to believe if you're reading the traditional news every day.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic to see the growth of the members. To see that growth also means that there's an obvious need for content like this. I think people are searching; they don't know what to believe. It's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of things to unpack, and it's hard in the digital scene. There's so much content to be able to absorb. So how does how does the Narwhal try to cut through that? Is that I guess just holding on to the facts and telling it as it is? Is there any other secret to it, or why do you think that's happening?
Yeah, I think it's such a good question. I wish I knew the answer. I think part of it is that we like have a pretty like unwavering high standard. So we are, especially as an online news outlet, like any misstep can really hurt your credibility, and so we try to be really consistently thoughtful and well researched and include like a breadth of opinions in our articles. And I think over time, that just builds trust. And at the end of the day, that's probably what it comes back to, is that trust factor. Is we have this kind of relatively small pool of people who have a huge amount of trust in us, and then they spread that word. But when people like your friend from Alberta stumble upon us, it's like every time somebody happens to land on our website, it's like this opportunity to build trust. And it's not an easy environment to build trust in when you're talking about some of the more contentious issues of our time. So it just kind of behooves us to keep putting in that effort to make sure that the content that we put out isn't like unnecessarily polarizing or one-sided or missing something. And so I think it probably comes back to that. It's just like a consistency of quality.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of the book The Lorax. I read it to my kids. It's a very simple story of overuse of our resources and how one seed in a child can make a difference. So asking you, what do you think businesses or people can do? It's 2022. The climate is being unbelievably impacted. The reports are not good. What can people do kind of as a first step, or just in their daily lives, or pressure or changes? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's really important, number one, that people don't just get overwhelmed and then do nothing, because that's a huge risk, right? Because there's so many things. And so to keep it simple, I would say choose something, that you can personally do, that gives you agency in your own life. So whether that's, driving less or, you know, whatever that may be for you, like choose something personal, but also choose something bigger than yourself. And that might be making a monthly donation to an organization. It might be, volunteering for a political party. It might be volunteering with a NGO, like do something, because just doing those personal changes can feel a little bit futile too. I think they're important, but it's also important to do something that is bigger than you. And that usually involves, getting involved in an organization somehow. And I think that's, one of the really cool things about nonprofits is like they done well, nonprofits can give people an avenue to making a meaningful change in the world that they wouldn't be able to make by themselves. So find a way to become part of something that's bigger than you as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this. I think obviously the Narwhal's done an amazing job of being able to grow from, just two people with an idea to almost 25 people, the largest company, I guess you'd call it, a nonprofit, to be able to cover environmental journalism and what you're doing. And for people, in terms of kind of helping the Narwhal view your content, share your content, donate as they can, anything you want to leave to the listeners?
Yeah, I would say visit the narwhal.ca and sign up for our newsletter. That's a really great way to make sure that you can stay up to date. We have a free weekly newsletter, keeps you up to date on all our latest reporting, and will just give you a little bit more of a taste of what we're all about. And we try to keep it, although the topics that we report on are quite serious and difficult at times, we try to keep the newsletter pretty fun. So come for the gifts and stay for the serious environmental journalism.
Well, thank you. And thank you again to you and your team for the hard fight and the work that you're doing to put this in front of everybody. It's hard work. And, I think, visit the Narwhal and you can see it. So thanks again, Emma.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
This podcast is co-produced with The Brand is Female. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode of Someone Like You. And if you did, please share this. We're a new podcast, and I would love it if you could share it with a family member, friend, colleague, work colleague. Share it on Slack, whoever you do. Just share and spread the message of these incredible brands. Please also support these type of companies. They're doing the hard thing, and the hard thing often takes a lot of people to get on board. And don't forget, please subscribe on the platform of your choice and give us a rating and review. I'm Marco Pimentel. Thank you for joining us today. For more information on Someone Like You, you can find us on Instagram at Someone Like You Podcast, with all the links to the podcast, our website, and more information about the brands that we feature. Thank you again.